Everyone, Pastor George here. Pleasure to see you today through the wonderful power of the internet. So today we're going to do chapter 2 of Tim Keller's The Reason for God. And this chapter has everything to do with the problem of evil. So I'm going to read something real quick. So something I like that he does at the beginning of each of his chapters is he gives actual quotes from people that he talked to in New York City about why they aren't a Christian or what they think about God, and he gives them at the beginning. So I'm going to read the one that he says here, and then I'll just talk about it a little bit. So he writes, "I just don't believe the God of Christianity exists," said Hillary, an undergrad English major. "God allows terrible suffering in the world, so he might be either all-powerful but not good enough to end evil and suffering, or else he might be all-good but not powerful enough to end evil and suffering. Either way, the all-good, all-powerful God of the Bible couldn't exist." "This isn't a philosophical issue to me," added Rob, Hillary's boyfriend. "This is personal. I won't believe in a God who allows suffering, even if he, she, or it exists. Maybe God exists, maybe not. But if he does, he can't be trusted." So the reason I like this is because this is one of the arguments that you will hear most, right, for the non-existence of God. This is actually called the theodicy question because it is so difficult to that's what they say, so difficult to answer that you can step on so many toes if you go around answering this incorrectly. And so that's why this is so interesting thing to talk about. One of the things I wanted to point out here is what Tim Keller does, and I think that we're going to do this best. So I'll read what he says, and then I'll just kind of comment on it. So, people we believe ought not to suffer, be excluded, die of hunger or oppression, but the evolutionary mechanism of natural selection depends on death, destruction, and violence of the strong against the weak. These things are all perfectly natural. On what basis, then, does the atheist judge the natural world to be horribly wrong, unfair, and unjust? The non-believer in God doesn't have a good basis for being outraged at injustice, which, as C.S. Lewis points out, he quoted him earlier, was the reason for objecting to God in the first place. If you are sure that this natural world is unjust and filled with evil, you are assuming the reality of some extra-natural or supernatural standard by which you make your judgment. So I think this is one of the best arguments, at least for people who do not believe in God, to start at a base level in. So for those who do not believe in God, it is very difficult for them philosophically to posit what is good and what is evil, because those things just don't exist without some sort of truth in the universe. And if you really get deep into it, you start to see that really the only truth can come from some outside source, because humans are fallible, right? We can make judgments in favor of ourselves. This is something that all societies have actually done. If you want to look at like kind of a baseline, at least in the ancient world, nearly all societies, I say nearly because we don't know about all of them that existed, but all the ones that I've studied, from the Babylonians to the Chinese to the Egyptians to the Aztec and Inca and Maya, all of them based their code and rules of conduct on some religious precept. The gods told them to do it, and so that's why they do it. Because even people realize that you can't just make things up; they have to come from some higher source. And so, for all time, this higher source was found in some outside supernatural thing. But with the Enlightenment and the challenging of all religious teaching, and the first real atheists, I think that we would call atheists, started to emerge, this kind of all gets wiped away. And this is why atheist philosophers today either posit that truth doesn't exist, or that we have to kind of live in this absurdity of believing these things even though we know it isn't true, which is very, very interesting. And I think that many people don't kind of do the philosophical legwork when they talk about this. They just say, oh, God can't exist because bad things happen. Well, it's like, well, what's bad? And so then you can have kind of a conversation about what is good, what is bad. We know things are bad or good because God tells us that they're bad or good, right? Which might be a cop-out, but that's really the only way that you can. It might seem like a cop out, but if you think about it, that's really the only way that you can start to learn anything. As far as those who aren't atheists but still have this objection, it's a good thing to look at some scripture in regards to this, especially the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis. Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, not the play. It's not as accurate to the story as it probably should be. But the point of the whole story is that Joseph goes through a lot of suffering, and what his suffering allows him to do is it allows him to save a lot of people. Something that would never have been possible at the beginning of the story. And at the end, it's Joseph confronts his brothers who kind of set off this whole thing, and he said, what you meant for evil, God meant for good and for the saving of many people. And I think that that's kind of the Christian response, is that we don't know the infinite mind of God. We do not know why things happen to people or bad things happen, but we do know that it's all within God's plan. One common Christian objection to this, and I do believe this, is that although it can be very callous to say, and so do not take this callously, but in Christian teaching and thought, right, is that we're all sinners, so we've all done bad things. So when people put forward the idea, why do good things happen to bad people, the Christian response to that usually is, well, that only happened one time, and it happened to Jesus Christ, right? The only perfect man who was unjustly killed for the sins of the world. And that's, that doesn't mean that when bad things happen to you that you deserve it, or that you just that we shouldn't care because, oh, look what happened to Jesus, isn't that worse? It can be done very callously, but I think the point of that is to show is that is not to ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people, but why do good things happen to bad people? And that, I think, is the more Christian response to this, at least the more modern Christian response to these types of things. And Tim Keller doesn't necessarily say that, but he does bring up the story of Joseph. So if you read it, you read it already, maybe you've run into that and you realize I'm just stealing things from. I already told you guys I steal everything. I don't make anything up for myself. So I will see you guys tomorrow when we do chapter 3. So I will see you then.